Something has just snapped in Putin's army. His soldiers are deserting in droves after being subjected to a military that is in a worse state now than it has been in its entire history. A dark presence now looms over these soldiers, a presence that saps their spirits and destroys their souls, stealing away from them any will to fight that they might have once had. And it's about to get a whole lot worse as Ukraine is preparing to twist the knife by turning the battlefield into a hellscape, all as Russia grows ever more desperate. And here's the most shocking thing. It's not Ukraine that is the dark presence destroying Russia's military, it's Russia. We take you to the embattled city of Chasiv Yar. Located in the Donetsk region, Chasiv Yar is a strategically important location because it's elevated. And with elevation comes the ability to rattle off artillery fire at the surrounding areas, along with better surveillance of the battlefield and increased control over FPV drones. Russia wants Chasiv Yar. It wants the city badly, to the point where it's falsely claimed the capture of it, in what can only be seen as an attempt to boost morale among the soldiers who have been sent to their deaths trying to capture Chasiv Yar. But Chasiv Yar is still, largely, in Ukrainian hands, and the Russian soldiers there are wreaking a special brand of chaos on their own army because they finally had enough of the dark presence that looms over them. That presence isn't Ukrainian drones, though they will always be a factor. It's something much more primal. Something that those soldiers have been deprived of, but that they need to survive, never mind fighting a war. We all know what it is, and we all need it to live. It's food and water. And Russia isn't providing either to the soldiers tasked with capturing what Russia itself believes is one of the most important cities in the war. In a February 16th report, Ukraine Today highlights comments made by the press officer of the 24th King Daniel's Separate Mechanized Brigade, Konstantin Melnikov. He says that though Russia still has the same goal as it always has in terms of penetrating the Ukrainian defenses at Chasiv Yar, it's trying to execute on that goal while leaving its own soldiers under a terrible dark cloud. Their command refuses to send them drones with provisions, ammunition, or even water, so people sit in these hiding places for weeks, sometimes longer, without food or water. This is Russia's latest strategy, and it's killing Putin's forces. The idea is to send small infiltration units, often as small as 2 or 3 soldiers, behind the front lines, so they can set up in the Ukrainian rear. Those soldiers aren't there to fight. Outside of the occasional opportunistic ambush, they simply have to bed in and hope that backup will come in the form of more soldiers and perhaps even the occasional piece of armor that will widen the tiny gap that they've created in Ukraine's defenses. It's been an effective enough strategy to allow Russia to make false claims of territory captures for propaganda purposes, but it's also a strategy that relies on the infiltrators bedding in for days or often weeks. And for that to work, those soldiers may just need the bare essentials that all humans need to stay alive, even when drones aren't buzzing over their heads constantly. Russia is denying its own soldiers these essentials, and it's having an effect, as Melnikov explains. There are cases where they can't take it anymore and surrender. Sometimes our troops capture the enemy during counteroffensives. The 24th Brigade alone has captured 8 of Russia's starving soldiers in the week leading up to February 16th, in addition to killing 60 and wounding a further 40, Ukraine Today reports. It comes to something when the most fearsome enemy that Russia's soldiers now face isn't Ukraine, but the complete indifference of their own country. But for those who have been paying attention, both in Ukraine and Russia itself, Putin's lack of regard for the people that he's entrusting to achieve his war goals shouldn't come as a surprise. That lack of care is coming back to bite Russia's leader on the rear, as you'll soon discover if you keep watching. Still, it's not like this is something that is new to Russia. Lack of food, water, and other supplies isn't a bug, it's a feature. Just a couple of weeks before the Ukraine Today report, Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, or HUR, released an audio recording to its YouTube channel that featured a Russian soldier explaining the conditions that he was subjected to by his own country. The soldier claimed that his uniform now hangs on him like a coat hanger. Why? Malnutrition. "We don't eat, we don't drink at all. If I turned sideways, you wouldn't even notice me," the soldier complained as he explained that food deliveries to his unit had essentially stopped. This is Russia's military in the 21st century. But remarkably, it's not necessarily like that soldier would have a better time back home. As Medusa reported back in November, about 1 in every 9 of Russia's residents lack access to clean drinking water, despite Russia having some of the largest freshwater reserves on the entire planet. Not even a $2.5 billion program designed to unleash the potential of those reserves had helped, likely because Russia needs to spend a lot more than that to help its people, and Putin would rather spend more money on his failing invasion. Russia can't even be bothered to get water supplies right for 1/9 of its population. For context, Russia's population is about 143.5 million people, which means that about 16 million of its citizens don't have clean drinking water. Why would Putin send food and water to the front lines when he won't even fix the massive problems back home? The Russian soldiers who are attempting to occupy Ukraine will be asking themselves that question as they come to understand that their own country is the dark presence that hangs over their heads. And that presence is no longer merely looming, it has engulfed Russia's soldiers, as we see from the fact that it's not just food and water that Putin and his cronies refuse to provide. Even the most basic equipment that a soldier needs to conduct an infantry assault has dried up. In November, the Telegraph reported that many of the soldiers attacking the Liman direction of Donetsk were being sent into assaults without basic helmets or body armor. It's a new trend, Deputy Commander of Ukraine's 2nd Mechanized Battalion Igor Komok said at the time. He also revealed that only 4 of the last 20 assault groups in Liman at the time of his report had helmets. For those keeping track at home, that adds up to 80% of those reported Russian assault groups who don't have what is one of the most basic pieces of military equipment that they should have. Other Russian soldiers are even less fortunate. In a December article, The Express reported that Russia isn't even providing socks and underwear to some of its soldiers. That claim didn't even come from Ukraine. It was made by a Russian military blogger named Yuri Podolyaka, who claimed, "One thing that amazes me now is that, and I just don't know how, but after 3.5 years of war, can we really not centrally provide our army with socks and underpants?" Bear in mind that Podolyaka is essentially a Kremlin asset. This is a man who was born in Ukraine, but has since become a key part of Russia's disinformation war against the country. If he is revealing just how bad the supply situation is for Putin's forces on the front, then things are going really badly. We'd say this callousness means more than a few Russian soldiers are finding that they have dark brown presences forming in their own pants, but they're not wearing any. And it's hard to form those sorts of presences when you're not even being fed. What we see in all of this is a recipe for the mass destruction of Russian soldiers that Ukraine is taking full advantage of, as you'll see if you stick with us to the end of the video. It's also a recipe for the surrender of huge numbers of soldiers, as Melnikov implied with his comments about what's happening in Chasiv Yar. The 8 prisoners that Ukraine took in about a week in that region add to the record-breaking number of Russian soldiers who are waving the white flag, because that flag is starting to feel like it's the only piece of equipment they have left. As United 24 media reported at the end of 2025, over 10,000 of Russia's soldiers have been taken prisoner by Ukraine since Putin launched his invasion. That figure, which comes from Ukraine's coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war, doesn't reveal everything. According to the same group, 2025 was the year in which surrender figures were the highest to date in the war. On average, between 60 and 90 Russian soldiers are surrendering to Ukraine every week, and there was even a peak of 350 surrendering soldiers in a single week back in August 2024. Ukraine has been capturing more of Russia's soldiers than Russia has been capturing Ukraine since June 2023, which is a trend that the Kremlin has no chance of reversing. The reason is the Kremlin and its dark presence are giving Russia's quitters plenty of reasons to let themselves be taken into custody. Many of these soldiers were people who didn't want to fight anyway, but were lured in with big money contracts. Now they're arriving on the front with no food, water, helmets, armor, or even socks, and Putin somehow still expects them to be willing to fight. Of course they're going to surrender. And rather than fixing the issues that have led to this version of the Russian military being an embarrassment, all that Russia seems to be willing to do is punish the wannabe surrendering soldiers that it catches. United 24 media reported that some of the soldiers who had attempted to surrender to the 24th Brigade in Chasiv Yar were shot down. Not by Ukraine, by Russian FPV drones, who targeted them, even though the drone operators could see that their supposed comrades were walking with their arms raised in surrender. This is chaos. It's Russia's army devouring itself due to Putin's relentless demands, and as you're just about to find out, the wanton destruction of its own people by the lethal combination of supply inadequacies and his own desire to live in a fantasy world where Russia is all-powerful is leading Putin down some desperate roads. Before we get deeper into that, you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. So, Putin's desperation. What does it look like now? We learned plenty from the UK's Defence Secretary John Healey, who spoke on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference per a February 16th report by United 24 media. Healey claims that Russia is so desperate to bring troops in for its ailing army that it's starting to look further and further afield to get them. It has to. News filters back home, no matter how much Putin tries to stop it, and soldiers on the front telling stories about Russia's complete failure to provide for them is clearly having an impact on recruitment. Russia is now at the point where it's losing more soldiers than it's able to mobilize. In January, Russia recruited 9,000 fewer soldiers than it lost against Ukraine, which is only more evidence that Putin has some major problems at home when it comes to finding people whom he can bribe, trick, or cajole into fighting for him. Frankly, none of this should be surprising based on what we've already learned. When you're sending starved and parched soldiers into a fight wearing no helmets or socks, you get freezing and ineffectual troops, that are easy prey for Ukraine's drones. The reliance on foreign soldiers is now so massive, Healy says, that at least 17,000 troops from North Korea are now fighting for Russia inside Ukraine. These soldiers, like many of Russia's other foreign troops, are often recruited under false pretenses and press-ganged under pressure without necessarily realizing that they're destined for the Russian meat machine on the front line of Ukraine, Healy claimed in Munich. Bloomberg also reported on the same conference, noting that Ukraine's defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, said that Russian recruitment is so bad that it's not just January that has seen the country underperform. The previous 2 months have seen Ukraine destroy more soldiers than Russia can hire. And it's not just North Korean soldiers that Russia is trying to trick into dying in Ukraine. Thousands are flooding in from places like Pakistan, India, Nigeria, Senegal, and Cuba, Bloomberg reports. Many experience the same lies and deception as Russia's North Korean contingent. The Kremlin makes promises, likely related to work visas and potential citizenship, so that it can get its hands on so-called soldiers who are really just people who went to Russia thinking that they might be able to build new lives for themselves. Instead, Putin packs them up and ships them out to Ukraine to die alongside the depleting numbers of actual Russians who are in the country's military. Both CNN and France 24 have reported on this foreign fighter phenomenon. CNN was actually ahead of the curve. It published a piece back in November where it revealed that Russia is using deception and bribery to sign up people from overseas to battle in Ukraine. The numbers it reported on were fairly small, as it said there was proof of 200 foreigners from 37 countries fighting, but that proof comes from Ukrainian captures, so it's hardly a huge stretch to suggest that there are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of non-Russians fighting a Russian war that the Russian people no longer want to fight. The mention of 37 countries also clues you into the fact that a handful we already mentioned is just the tip of the iceberg. Kenya, Nepal, Tajikistan, and many others have also unwittingly provided meat for Putin's war machine. In South Africa, an investigation was underway in November after the country's authorities received distress calls from 17 men who had somehow ended up fighting in the Donbass region after heading over to Russia. France 24 adds to all of this, noting that the notorious Wagner mercenary group has played a large role in forcing these foreign fighters into Ukraine. It reports that it has proof of almost 1,500 people being sent to Ukraine from 35 different countries, many of which are on the African continent where Wagner operates. More than 300 of these foreign fighters are already dead. And the real numbers in both accounts are likely far higher because Russia has gone so far as to set up a fraudulent travel agency that it uses as part of its deceptive scheme to bring foreign fighters into Ukraine. We say fighters, we mean cannon fodder. If you want to talk chaos on the front lines, this is how you get it. Imagine the nightmare that these unwitting foreign soldiers step into. Already terrified after being sent into Ukraine, they end up with commanders who order them to their deaths and comrades that they can't even communicate with. Language barriers alone would make it so that the most complex instructions a callous commander could give would be to point in a direction and basically consign the soldier to whatever type of death awaits them as they draw closer to a Ukrainian position. And if Russian soldiers aren't even being given food, water, or equipment, it hardly seems likely that these foreign fighters are getting such so-called luxuries. This is Putin's desperation. The building of an army that he can't command to replace an army that he has spent 4 years abusing into a state of complete shambles. Now, we told you earlier in the video that Ukraine is naturally taking advantage of all of this. It's doing that by making the kill zones that Russia's terrified troops, foreign or otherwise, have to navigate before they even have a chance of storming Ukraine's fortifications. The combat lines are far from traditional in the Ukraine war right now. In some areas of the front lines, the kill zones stretch for as far as 20 kilometers, or about 12.4 miles of terrifying terrain that is infested with drones and defenses. That's what Russia is sending its soldiers into, and it doesn't take a genius to see that the inevitable is happening. Where once Russia was losing 6 soldiers for every Ukrainian casualty, which is already a massive disparity, it's now losing up to 25 soldiers for every Ukrainian loss in some areas of the front line. Putin and his dark presence created the recipe for chaos, and Russia's soldiers are reaping the rewards of their leaders' utter incompetence. These kill zones have led to Russia's favored tactic of mass mechanized assaults all but disappearing, as Euromaidan Press reported in December. Of course, it was already hard enough for Russia to sustain these assaults when it's running out of armor, but the kill zones make it so that any tank or armored vehicle that enters is almost guaranteed to be destroyed by a Ukrainian drone after running afoul of mines, ditches, and dragon's teeth. So Russia increasingly relies on small meat assaults. Small teams of infiltrators who are sent in without equipment or supplies, just as we see in Chasiv Yar, have the almost impossible task of navigating these kill zones. The few who are somehow successful enjoy the grand prize of sitting and waiting for Ukraine's soldiers and drones to hunt them down and kill them. and kill is what those drones do. Around 30,000 Russian soldiers died in January. A staggering 35,000 were eliminated the month before, all by Ukraine's drones. Ukraine now has a target of scoring 50,000 kills on the occupying Russian forces every month by the end of 2026, and the complete chaos into which Putin has plunged his military makes it seem very likely that the goal will be reached. What is already horrific for the soldiers that Russia forces onto the front lines is going to get a whole lot worse. Russia's dark presence isn't going away. It's going to cripple any chance that Putin has of being remembered as the glorious conqueror that he so desperately wants to be. The future is bleak for Russia, and that future extends far beyond the country's military. The country is losing its sense of self as Putin's terrible tactics are destroying an entire generation of people that Russia needs to sustain itself in the future. A demographic crisis born from the chaos that Putin has created is looming, and you can find out all about it in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you are subscribed to the Military Show as we chart Russia's descent into abject failure day by day. And thank you as always for watching.